8 men would walk into a sealed training room on a naval base in 1973 convinced they were about to expose a fraud, and 8 seconds later one of them would be lying on the mat staring at the ceiling, realizing his career and his certainty about power had just collapsed. But no cameras were allowed, no reports were written, and for decades the Navy refused to explain why one name was quietly removed from a command roster that same week. It began as an invitation that didn't feel like one. Bruce Lee arrived at the coastal training facility just after sunrise, the Pacific fog still clinging to the concrete like a held breath, escorted through checkpoints by sailors who stared too long and spoke too little, the kind of looks men give when they've already made up their minds about you. Officially, Bruce had been invited to demonstrate alternative hand-to-hand principles for morale and cross-training. Unofficially, he had been summoned because a particular SEAL team leader, decorated, feared, and loudly unimpressed, had been mocking him for months. The man's name was Commander Richard Hale, a veteran of Vietnam with a chest full of ribbons and a voice that carried like a weapon. Hale didn't believe in martial arts. He believed in size, aggression, and men who could break other men under pressure. He had called Bruce a dancer, a performer, a Hollywood illusion wrapped in philosophy, and when word reached him that Bruce Lee was stepping onto his base, Hale saw an opportunity not to learn, but to humiliate. The briefing room was already full when Bruce entered, 8 men total, all SEALs, all combat tested, all built like monuments, their posture loose but watchful, eyes sharp with the quiet confidence of men who had survived things most people never would. Hale stood at the front, arms crossed, not bothering to hide his smirk. "So this is him," he said, not offering a hand. "This is the legend." Bruce nodded politely, setting his small bag down near the wall. He felt it immediately, the tension, the hostility, the hunger for spectacle. He had felt it before in boxing gyms, dojos, film studios, anywhere someone needed him to fail to feel larger themselves. Hale began circling him slowly, like a predator inspecting prey, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You know what I don't get?" Hale said. "Men die under my command. Real men. They don't have time for poetry or philosophy. They need what works." Bruce met his eyes calmly. "What works depends on understanding," he replied. A few men shifted uncomfortably. Hale laughed, sharp and dismissive. "Understanding doesn't stop a bullet. Strength does. Speed does. Violence does." He leaned in closer. "You ever been in a real fight, Mr. Lee?" Bruce didn't answer immediately. He looked around the room, at the men who had been ordered to witness this, who didn't yet realize they were about to be part of something that would follow them for the rest of their lives. "Every day," Bruce said quietly. Hale straightened, jaw tightening. "You know what I see?" he snapped. "I see a man who's been protected by cameras and scripts. You talk about combat, but you've never had to prove it." The room went silent. Even the air seemed to still. Bruce could feel the line being crossed, deliberately. Hale turned to the others. "This is what Hollywood sells now. Little men pretending they're dangerous." He turned back to Bruce, eyes cold. "If you're really what they say you are, come prove you're a man." One of the senior enlisted men glanced toward the door. Another swallowed hard. This wasn't scheduled. This wasn't approved. Hale didn't care. "Controlled test," he said, already walking toward the training mat. "No strikes to the throat. No permanent damage. You defend yourself. I apply pressure." Bruce knew then exactly what this was. Not training. Not curiosity. A public breaking, contained, undocumented, deniable. He could refuse. He could walk out and preserve his body, his career, his myth. But something else was at stake. These men taught others how to fight. What they believed would shape how soldiers survived or died. Bruce removed his shoes slowly, placing them neatly by the wall. The movement was calm, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Hale scoffed. "Take your time." The door behind them closed with a heavy metallic click. No cameras. No witnesses beyond the 8 men inside. Hale stepped onto the mat and rolled his shoulders. He outweighed Bruce by at least 80 pounds. He had reach, muscle, and the confidence of a man who had never been embarrassed in front of his peers. "Whenever you're ready," Hale said. Bruce stepped forward, eyes empty, breath steady. One of the SEALs later said that was the moment everything changed. The moment Bruce Lee stopped being a person and became something else, something unervingly precise. Hale lunged without warning. A textbook explosive entry meant to overwhelm and dominate. the kind that ended fights fast. He expected resistance. He expected impact. What he got was nothing. Bruce moved, not away, but through the attack, his body slipping into the dead space Hale didn't know existed. The commander felt his balance vanish before he understood why. In that fraction of a second, the room stopped breathing. Part 1 ends there, on the edge of motion, with 8 men about to learn that everything they believed about power, strength, and masculinity was about to be dismantled in less time than it takes to blink. The moment Commander Hale committed his weight forward, the fight was already over, though no one in that sealed training room understood it yet, because what they were trained to see, muscle, aggression, dominance, was useless against what Bruce Lee did next. Hale's charge was violent and efficient, a forward explosion meant to crush space and force submission. The same tactic that had broken insurgents and trainees alike. But Bruce didn't retreat, didn't brace, didn't resist in the way Hale's body expected. Instead, he slipped diagonally into the attack, his foot landing exactly where Hale's momentum was weakest, his torso rotating with surgical economy. And in that instant the commander felt something deeply wrong, a brief, terrifying absence of contact where control should have been. A sharp palm struck the side of Hale's neck. Not hard, not theatrical, just precise, and the signal between brain and body stuttered. Hale's vision fractured, the room tilting as if the floor itself had shifted. Before anyone could react, Bruce's elbow grazed Hale's sternum, not with brute force, but with timing so exact it collapsed his breath inward, stealing air rather than expelling it. 1 second. Hale staggered, confused, instinctively reaching to grab, to regain dominance, but Bruce was already gone, circling into his blind side, his movement smooth, almost casual, as if he were stepping around furniture. A low kick tapped the inside of Hale's knee, not a strike meant to destroy, just enough to interrupt structure, and the joint betrayed him, buckling with a dull, humiliating weakness. 2 seconds. The sound Hale made wasn't a cry. It was a gasp, sharp and involuntary, the noise of a man whose body had stopped obeying his intent. One of the SEALs took a half step forward, then froze, unsure whether to intervene or witness. Bruce was inside Hale's space now, so close that Hale could smell him, could see the calm in his eyes, the complete absence of effort. A finger jab stopped a breath away from Hale's throat, close enough that he could feel the air move against his skin. 3 seconds. Everything in Hale's training screamed at him to respond, to counter, to overpower, but his limbs lagged behind his thoughts, his equilibrium shattered by micro-adjustments he couldn't perceive. Bruce withdrew the jab without touching him, stepped back half a pace, and Hale lunged again out of pure instinct, rage and humiliation fueling a clumsy overcommitment. That was the mistake. Bruce pivoted, his hip turning like a switch being flipped, and his forearm met Hale's jaw with a short, snapping motion that carried no flourish and no wasted energy. The impact wasn't explosive, it was final. Hale's teeth clicked together, his head whipped sideways, and the world went white. For seconds, his feet slid out from under him, not dramatically, not violently, just suddenly, and he hit the mat flat on his back with a hollow sound that echoed off the walls. 5 seconds. Silence crashed into the room heavier than any shout. No one moved. No one spoke. Hale stared up at the ceiling, chest heaving in shallow, panicked bursts, his mind scrambling to understand why he was horizontal, why his hands wouldn't close properly, why the room felt so far away. Bruce stood over him, not in a dominant stance, not poised to finish, just standing, breathing evenly, as if he had completed a simple demonstration rather than dismantle the commander in front of his men. 6 seconds. One of the SEALs glanced instinctively toward the door, then back at Hale, whose authority had just evaporated in real time. Another felt a cold tightening in his gut. Not fear exactly, but the uncomfortable recognition that something foundational had cracked. Bruce stepped back fully now, creating space, palms open, non-threatening. "Enough," he said quietly. 7 seconds. Hale tried to sit up and failed, his body rebelling, his balance gone, his pride in ruins. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out, only a ragged breath. Bruce didn't help him up. He didn't mock him. He simply waited. 8 seconds. That was all it took. 8 seconds to undo years of certainty. The ranking officer present cleared his throat but said nothing, his face pale, eyes fixed on Hale as if looking at a man he no longer recognized. The other SEALs stood frozen, minds replaying the sequence again and again, each replay worse than the last because they realized there had been no luck, no trick, no weakness exploited, only understanding. Bruce finally spoke, his voice calm, almost gentle. "Strength without balance is borrowed," he said, "and borrowed things are easily taken back." No one responded. Hale lay there, staring at the ceiling, the weight of what had happened settling in with crushing clarity. He hadn't been beaten in a contest. He had been exposed, and every man in that room knew it. What followed the 8 seconds was not outrage or retaliation, but something far more unsettling, quiet, heavy, deliberate silence. Because no one in that sealed training room knew how to put words to what they had just witnessed without dismantling everything they believed about themselves. Commander Hale was eventually helped to his feet by 2 men who avoided his eyes, his movements stiff and cautious, his authority leaking away with every unsteady step, and when he finally found his voice it came out hoarse and uncertain, stripped of the steel that had filled it minutes earlier. No one laughed. No one spoke up in his defense. The ranking officer present made a decision without announcing it, the kind of decision that doesn't need signatures to be enforced. "That's enough for today," he said, and the words landed like a lid being placed over something dangerous. Bruce put his shoes back on slowly, methodically, the same way he had taken them off, his hands steady, his expression unreadable. He did not wait for thanks. He did not seek acknowledgement. He knew better. Hale left the room first, escorted, his shoulders hunched in a way none of the men had ever seen before, and the door closed behind him with a finality that felt symbolic. The remaining 7 stayed where they were, eyes following Bruce as if he were something they weren't sure was entirely real. One of them finally broke the silence, his voice low. "That wasn't strength," he said. Bruce paused at the door. "No," he replied. "It was understanding." He left without another word. Within hours, quiet orders moved through the base. No reports were filed. No incident logs were created. The session was reclassified as a canceled demonstration due to schedule conflicts. Hale's name disappeared from the command rotation by the end of the week, reassigned without explanation to an administrative post far from training floors and far from men who had seen him fall. No punishment was announced, but no promotion followed either. Among the 7 who witnessed it, the story was never told straight. It was hinted at in fragments, in half-sentences spoken late at night, in training adjustments that subtly emphasized balance, timing, and economy of motion over brute force. One man began studying martial arts quietly after his discharge. Another rewrote his hand-to-hand curriculum without ever citing a source. Decades later, when one of them was asked why no one ever talked about Bruce Lee and the SEALs, he answered simply, "Because some lessons are too dangerous to turn into legends." Bruce Lee never mentioned the incident publicly. He didn't need to. He understood that the most powerful truths don't spread through headlines, but through changed behavior, through men who move differently because they've seen something they can't unsee. The 8 seconds were never recorded, never replayed, never proven, but they lived on in silence, in the way doors were closed, in the way egos were softened, in the way one commander learned that masculinity measured only in force is fragile. History would remember Bruce Lee as a movie star, a philosopher, a cultural icon, but 8 men remembered him as something else entirely. The man who walked into a locked room, dismantled certainty without cruelty, and left behind a truth so unsettling that it had to be buried, not because it wasn't real, but because it was.